Good evening, everybody. Perek Tesvov, chapter 15. B'darkei knias haprishus. Prishus, we're talking about prishus, which means separation, which means going beyond the letter of the law in our striving to become closer to Hashem. We're in the area of activity which not everybody is capable of reaching, but anybody, as we said last week, who could reach that level is expected to reach that level. At least some part of that. Could be in our generation, that's going to be very few people who will attain this level, as we've said before and many times. Even if a person just touches that level for one moment in his life, does one action, which is an action of precious, that's already, it makes him a different person. It doesn't just mean that he did it once. It means that he becomes a different person because he was there. Anybody who's ever davened once, even once in his life really well, knows what it means to daven. And all the rest of his davenings, even on the days where he's, as they say in the theater, phoning it in. You know, he's not really there at all. He's just saying the words, but he's a different person. It's an experience. Our experience, in a sense, we are the sum of our experiences, which is why we have to be very careful what it is we see, what it is we hear, because at the end of the day, we're the sum of what we used our senses for. And therefore, even if a person even only once reaches beyond himself, he'll be a different person for the rest of his life, which is a very encouraging thing if you think about it, because let's face it, most of us, when I say most of us, I mean myself, it's very difficult even to maintain you call it entry level, the basic level of what's called tzidkus, of being a righteous person. Every Jew is expected to be a tzaddik. What's a tzaddik? A tzaddik is somebody who does everything it says in the Shulchan Aruch. Okay? I'm not sure that, maybe leave it at that. You know, that in itself is something which is a tremendous achievement. And we're talking about going beyond that. But as we said before, even to reach above yourself a little bit leaves you a taller person than you started off. So, we're now talking in chapter 15 about the darkei knias haprishus. How does a person acquire this midah, this character trait of precious, literally separation? And again, separation means separating yourself from things which are considered to be okay. The halacha permits them, but they could lead to a situation in which you don't want to be. And we're going to see, for example, anything to do with the pleasures of this world, hanos olam hazeh, built into that is a danger. Even though, of course, a person lives in a body, so to speak, is the guf, the word chomer, material, in Hebrew, is connected to the word chamor. A chamor is a donkey. In a sense, the body is a bit like a donkey. It gets you from one place to another. It gets you from where you need to get to in this world. And the chamor, a donkey, needs hay, needs food, needs rest, needs pleasure to a certain extent. And oy vavoy, if a person denies his body the things that the body needs, he'll find that the body will rebel. So a person has to make sure that his donkey, so to speak, is functioning in order to get him to where he needs to get to be able to use his physical self in simcha, in joy, to do the mitzvahs, to serve Hashem, to daven, to learn. We're not incorporeal spiritual beings. Hashem specifically put us into this world in a body. We spoke about this right at the beginning of the book. And as the Ramchal says, that the body eventually, after Tchias HaMesim, after the resurrection of the dead, and one of the reasons why the body will be resurrected, maybe the reason, is because the body also deserves its share of its reward for helping the neshama, the soul, to achieve the level that it managed to achieve in this world. It couldn't do that without the body. It's a partnership. But the nature of chumri is the nature of materiality, of physicality is, as we said before, downward leaning. The person, Odom me'afar, man comes from the dust, from the earth, and the nature of the dust, the earth is to sink down. So there's always this downward valence when anything that comes to the physical world, the pleasures of this physical world. And so he says, the best way for a man to acquire precious is to look at the pleasures of this world and really analyze them and see how lacking they really are, how inferior they really are, both intrinsically, and he'll explain what this means in a moment, both intrinsically and also, as we said before, that what they can lead to can be very bad. The first thing he wants to say is when a person focuses his mind, his aspirations on physical pleasure is, we'll talk about food and about comfort and even permitted pleasures. When a person gets himself that he can only eat a certain kind of food or drink a certain kind of drink, so he puts himself into a situation where it means he has to spend a lot of time working out, unless of course he's been given a vast inheritance, how he's going to get to these things. And so it can take a tremendous amount of time of his life satisfying these overblown physical desires. It requires a lot of strength and scheming to separate a person himself from them. And the nature of the body is that and if you think about it, this is really the secret of all advertising. Madison Avenue discovered this many years ago. I don't know if Madison Avenue is still the center of advertising. When I was a kid, it used to be. Madison Avenue, that's like synonymous with advertising, is to give this superficial appeal. Why? Because people want to make money. Advertising tries to sell you toothpaste by showing you a glamorous lifestyle. People who use this particular toothpaste are never tired. They never have bags under their eyes. They're endlessly rich. They flit from one party to another, and they're always fresh and slim and healthy and smiling. And they never have problem with their children, probably because they don't have children. But it's this. The whole idea is to sell this illusion, glamour. The word glamour is the whole idea of if you look at the pleasures of this world, they really are only skin deep. They're pretty superficial. They're extremely fleeting. But a person needs to spend, to think about it, because they're also very alluring. I mean, it's not by chance that these advertising executives spend and get paid a tremendous salary in order to figure out what it is that will make a person put his hand into his pocket and pull out his well-earned bucks. So he has to sell toothpaste or to sell dog food or whatever it is. There's an illusion going on there, and the illusion is that's really the illusion of pleasures in this world, is that the pleasure promises you something which you have to very carefully analyze and realize exactly what this is, and you'll see that it's very superficial. There's nothing really there. The eyes tend to be deceived by good and pleasing superficial appearances, he says. And if you think about it, this is really right back at the beginning of creation with Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve. And if you look at the way Eve was deceived and seduced, Chava was tempted, because it says in the pasuk in Bereshis Gimel Vav, "Vateira ha'isha ki tov ha'etz lemachal." She saw that it was good to eat. She didn't know it was good to eat. She hadn't tasted it at this point. She saw it was good. What do you mean? How can you see something that it's good to eat? From the outside, you can see that it's good to eat? No. That's the idea. It was seductive. It promised something that it wasn't going to deliver. That's the whole trick of the pleasures of this world, is to promise and to not deliver. And it goes on, the pasuk goes on to say, "V'chitavahu leinayim." It was delightful to the eye. And the word tava is something which usually is talked about in terms of physical pleasure, meaning that it managed to give her eyes a physical pleasure. Now, of course, sight is certainly not in this sense, is not a pleasure in itself, but it fooled. Her eyes were fooled by the seduction of the fruit. V'tikach miprio v'tochal. And because of this seduction of the eyes, of this superficial appearance, for this reason she took it and she ate it. When a person spends time and thinks and analyzes, and he realizes that this so-called quote-unquote good is a deception, it's an illusion, it's, as they call in Hebrew, a bluff. It has no permanence at all. It's a spell, and that it either contains real evil or it's going to lead to real evil. So for these two things, first of all, number one, he sees that it's illusory, that it really isn't anything substantial. And also, the second thing he has to look at and realize is that it's something which is fraught with danger and will lead him to real evil. And that point, that's how a person comes to despise and turn aside and not involve himself with Olam Hazeh more than he needs to. As we said before, we're living in a body. But the body, when you allow the body to take over the driver's seat, when the donkey, so to speak, starts to drive the cart rather than the farmer or whatever, the guy who's leading the donkey, then you're in trouble. So a person has to analyze this, go over this, dwell on this, and make it clear to himself, and to recognize that the weakness, the insubstantiality, the falseness of the pleasures of Olam Hazeh. And by doing this intellectual process, because of the truth of this process, because of the truth of what it is that he's internalizing, he's intuiting, he will then naturally come to despise these pleasures and find it not difficult at all to spurn them. Okay. Let's talk first about eating. There's no more pleasure, he says, more basic, more muchash, more murgash, more immediate than eating. Eating is an extremely immediate pleasure. But is there anything more evanescent? The food, the enjoyment of your food is for a split second, and it takes place in the throat. And the throat is a very small space. It's the size of, the amount of pleasure is just what's, and once it leaves to the throat and it descends to the intestines, to your stomach and the digestive system, it's gone. There's absolutely no difference when the food hits the bottom of your stomach or once it's past your throat between fatted duck and coarse bread. They both will satiate a person when we're talking about in terms of filling his stomach. Also, Just as I'm reading this now, I'm aware, I'm thinking to myself, and I'm sure you can check this very easily, that the statistics of obesity in the Western world now have reached like astronomical proportions. So much so that healthcare providers are seriously investing in methods of prevention, because the cure for the curing of diseases which are directly caused by bad eating, overeating mainly, are so expensive. The major cause of heart disease and cancers, and it's just amazing how much more healthy a person is if he doesn't overeat. But if you think about it, the ads for food on the television, it looks so scrumptious, and it's very easy to titillate a person's palate, because, as we said, eating is the most substantial, the most immediate pleasure of this world. And so a person has to think very carefully about what it is. Nowadays, I think health companies are prepared to give injections to make people lose weight if they're seriously overweight, because it's just, for them, it's cheaper than it's going to be treating the outcome of not getting to lose weight, whatever it is, diabetes, Shem Yerachim, all, you name it, almost all diseases are in some way linked to food. And that's what he says here, quite literally. If you consider how many sicknesses are connected with eating, and even if you don't habitually overeat, I think we all know the feeling of having eaten a good meal and getting up, and the heaviness that comes, right? Your whole brain is sort of foggy and cloudy, and it's clear that your brain becomes weighed down. If a person would think about this, if you think twice about launching into eating for pleasure, and realize that the good that he thinks it is, or at least he's being told by his Yetzer Hara, by the pleasures of this world, the good, that the pleasure he's going to have, which, as we've said before, is pretty minimal and pretty evanescent. It's a moment on his palate. And the evils that can result from it. Again, this is, but a person has to think about these things. This is one of the cardinal principles of this book. He says it right at the beginning. A person has to think. Most of our time, we are being told not to think. The Yetzer Hara, I'm not sure if Nike ever realized this, but it seems to me that the Yetzer Hara must have been the copywriter for Nike's slogan when they say, just do it. The Yetzer Hara wants to just do it. Don't think too much, just do it. The essence of being able to control yourself, living a healthy life, living a life which is going to bring you aliyah in spirituality, from the beginning and to this point of Precious, is thinking. Think. Think about it. Think. And again, a lot of our lives, he says in the beginning of the book, like Paro, the first resource of any repressive regime is to stop people thinking. Keep people's noses to the grindstone. Keep them working so hard that they're not going to have time to think. Now, it's just not just Paro who kept the Klal Yisrael with their noses to the grindstone, building the pyramids and the cities, Pitam Varamses. It wasn't just that. This is something that goes on today. If you think how much of the world we live in, we are being told not to think. We're being fed a diet of instant pleasure. I mean, the statistics about how many hours are people using their cell phones. People have smartphones. The hours and hours, I think it's like 8 hours a day or something. 8 hours a day. A third of their waking life is spent one way or another, whatever it is, looking at videos, or I think YouTube is the second most popular channel in the whole world. And what is this doing? Am I thinking? No. I'm being distracted. I'm once called the smartphone, the weapons of mass distraction. Everything about the society we live in, the secular society we live in, is very similar in a more subtle, sophisticated way to what went on in Egypt. And any repressive regime will try and keep its population quiet, sedated by a constant diet, either of keeping them working, or keeping them distracted the whole time. To me, this is very obviously, this is the battlefront. This is what people in your generation have got are fighting against. To achieve this kind of sensitivity and awareness to what's going on in the world and what you're here for and what life's all about becomes extremely difficult when much of a person's day he lives in a state of semi-comatose distraction, being fed one short after another, one video after another, one news item after another. There is really very little news. Ein chadash tachas hashemesh. Somebody once said that if you took the newspapers from 50 years ago and changed the names, it would be almost exactly the same as it is today. It's a big subject. Similarly, an analysis of all other worldly pleasures, all other honas of olam hazeh, even their illusory good, it's an illusion, it's not really a good, and it only lasts for a short time. And we said with all of them, they can grow out of them, becomes the evil that comes from them can be prolonged and very severe. So no reasoning individual, nobody with a moach b'kad kodo, a brain in his skull, would consent to expose himself to these evil dangers if he started to think about it. When all he's really getting out of it is this illusory, transitory good. This is something which is self-evident. But again, a person, same thing, has to reflect. He has to separate himself. He has to be mitboded. And it's very good to go out in the middle of a field into a state of seclusion and contemplation. But even if you can't do that, a person can always find time to just walk around the block and say, I'm going for a 5-minute walk and I'm going to go and think. I'm going to sit on that park bench for a couple of minutes and I'm going to think. Or just before you fall asleep at night, I'm going to think. I'm going to run over my day. I'm going to think about the things that really wasted my time. And you probably won't be able to fix it all at one time, but even the awareness of what needs to be fixed is in itself a tremendous achievement. It's the first step to fixing it. In order to know what a person needs to fix, he has to have aware that there's something wrong. I used to say partly as a joke, before Elul, where we're supposed to take stock of our year because Rosh Hashanah is approaching. We should make very much at that time of year a cheshbon nefesh, how do you say it in English? A summary of what's going on in our lives, a calculation, debit and credit. And what I do to fool myself into doing this is I make a list of things that I don't want to do. It's partly a joke, but it's also partly true. Things that I don't want to do. Things, meaning what? That I really know that I should be doing these things, but I'm not quite ready to do them right now. So in a way, that's a trick, because once I'm prepared to put it onto the list of the things that I don't want to do, I can now move it one by one onto the things that I have to do. But again, it all starts with analysis, it all starts with thought, it all starts with reflection. And as I said, everything in this world is geared, designed to make us rush forward headlong without thought. Just do it. Now this, now this, now this, now this. Attention spans get shorter and shorter. And the shorter our attention spans become, the more and more difficult it becomes to do what I'm talking about, which is to step out, step off the train, step off the treadmill, off the, what is it, the treadmill. Like you see mice running and round and round and round, going absolutely nowhere. So, again, if a person is matmid, if he accustoms himself, it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen once. It's not going to happen twice. Anything, any spiritual growth has to have three conditions. Number one, it has to be something small. Number two, it has to be something which is constant. And number three, it should be something which is secret. Nobody else knows about it. A person stands on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, and he's clapping al chait, and he says, I'm never going to speak Lashon Hara again. I'm never going to, whatever it is, I'm never going to speak Lashon Hara again. So, the Yetzer Hara is looking down, laughing his head off. If a person says, something, once a week on Sunday morning when I eat breakfast, I'm going to bench with a siddur, that's he's got a chance of doing. And that really makes a big difference to a person. Rav Wolbe Zatzal once described in the 1973 war, after the initial debacle, the disaster in the Sinai, the Israeli army managed to surround the entire Egyptian Third Army and was in the position to cut them off completely. Anyway, Israeli troops were basically, as they put it, in Africa, on the other side of the canal, in large numbers. And they asked Rav Wolbe if he would go across to give the troops some chizuk, to speak to them, encourage them. So, of course, in those days, there were, at that point in the war, there certainly were no commercial flights to the other side of the canal. So they put him in a two-seater jet fighter in the back seat. And as they're crossing the canal, suddenly this jet fighter drops down to about 50 feet off the dirt and starts to go very, very fast. So Rav Wolbe he says to the pilot, is everything all right? Is everything okay? He says, yes, don't worry, Rabbi. I'm just getting down below the enemy radar. And Rav Wolbe took that as a Musa Haskel, as a parable. You want to get down, you want to save yourself from getting shot down out of the sky by the Yetzer Hara, you've got to go low. Take on something small, but do it all the time. Do it, and do it secretly. Because when things are secret, they have a power. When things are in the open, they become more vulnerable to the Yetzer Hara. I'll give you a small example. Back in the day, and now of course things are much more sophisticated here at Or Sameach, but back in the day where the old bathrooms were, which you probably don't remember, I'm having trouble to remember where they were now. But anyway, they used to, outside the bathrooms, they used to have these very kind of antiquated metal boxes that you kind of flip open, and inside was this roll of paper with this primitive piece of wood inside. So I took it upon myself that I would just make sure, when nobody was around, that I would just make sure there was always paper in there. It was just a little thing. Because why? Because I wanted to work on the midah of giving. It was
secretive.
Yeah, I did it when nobody was looking, and it was something that I tried to do all the time. And it was a very small thing. Just make sure that when somebody comes out of the bathroom, there's going to be paper to dry their hands. So it's something like, if you can find something that, if you're working on this was particularly to work on the midah of being a person who is giving. Now, of course, a person should be a giving person, not because the world works better, but because Hashem wants me to be a giving person. He created me to be a giver. That's what it means to be created, B'Tselem Elokim, imitatio Dei. In the image of God, He created him. The image of God means just like God is a giver, you have to be a giver. Of course, you'll never be able to give like God gives, because to God, you can never give anything back. But as much as a person can, given that he's a human being. But these things have to be worked on. And I'm saying that the way that a person works, and a person is not going to be able to become a porush overnight, a person who separates himself from the pleasures of this world, and he'll be he'll be fooling himself, and he'll get shot down out of the sky by the Yetzer Hara if he tries to say, I don't know, I'm never going to eat chocolate cookies again. I'm assuming you like chocolate cookies. But you know something, you can say, instead of having 2 chocolate cookies, I'm going to have 1. That he can do. That's possible to do. Instead of having 2 portions of cholent on Shabbos, even though, of course, Shabbos is supposed to have, but I'll have 1 portion. Things like this have a tremendous impact on a person. And the Yetzer Hara doesn't want you to do them because he knows how big they are. So he'll try and make it seem to you that they're very small. Like, who cares, 1 piece of meat, 2 pieces of meat, 1 chocolate cookie, 2 chocolate. No. If a person makes a decision in one area of his life, he's going to be a little bit more porush. It's going to separate. We're talking about things which are mutter. I mean, that should be clear. We're not talking about chas v'chalila doing aveiros. Things which are mutter. Chocolate biscuits, to the best of my knowledge, especially if they've got a nice big kosher stempel, b'dat seder charedis, they're kosher. You could eat 5 of them, maybe. But when a person tries to move up, he gets help from upstairs, number 1. And this makes him, and that's really what I want to get across tonight, it makes him into a different person. And he says that the point is to take from this world only which is essential to you. And he says, just as focusing, concentrating, examining, reflecting on the baseless emptiness of all the so-called pleasures of this world, how empty they really are, how evanescent, how transitory they are, and how they can lead to so many bad things. Person who involves himself in too much food, person involves himself in too much physical pleasure, can fall prey to all kinds of aveiros. So just as reflecting on these things brings a person to be able, without much effort, to be able to separate himself, at least to a certain extent. So conversely, the failure to do this will leave him in the other direction.
Sir, can I ask a question?
Sure.
What type of Averos are you talking about with regard to, like, if you do certain things, it will lead to bad things?
A person who indulges himself in olam hazeh, in, let's say, food. Food, that will, first of all, can lead to illness. Food, pampering yourself, leads to a certain attitude that to disconnect, that the physical world becomes more important to you, that you can spend a lot of energy trying to get things which are really not that important. He gives the example of fatted geese. You have to have the best sushi in town. So you drive yourself crazy. You have to get a job which you have, want to live in this large, big house. So you're going to spend all your day. A person who involves himself in pleasures, inevitably will want other kinds of pleasures. And that spills over sometimes into illicit pleasures. When a person is focused on getting the most he can out of this world, so it doesn't just stop at one thing. It doesn't stop at what's permissible. It nearly always will lead him past. He'll be very slack when it comes to kashrus, because it's very important to me to have the best sushi. I have to have the best sushi. So this, this heksha is not terribly good, and okay, it doesn't matter. It's a gradual process of erosion. The nature of this world is to make a person more physical. So a person has to be aware of that. Now, of course, Judaism is not monastic. We don't believe for the vast, overwhelming majority of people to cut themselves off from this world is correct or healthy. But the whole principle of his book is that the person should take from this world what he needs, not necessarily what he wants. And even if, we talked about this in previous weeks, a person needs, as I said, a certain amount of pleasure in this world to keep himself happy, to keep himself functioning, to make himself be able to learn, to do the mitzvahs. But everybody needs to know, and that's why it says, Kanei lecha chaver aseh lecha rav. You need a friend and you need a rabbi to be able to guide you as to what it is that you need and what it is that you don't need. Again, you're not going to be able to make that decision too wisely yourself, because Adam Nogea Klape Atzmo, a person, when it comes to himself, is, what's the word in English, is biased. But for sure, a person has to have a certain degree, and of course this will depend on who you are, how you were brought up. For sure, I remember Rabbi Yaakov Hillel told us that when the Americans started to move into Azeh Bira, and they had sort of quite nice flats over there. So, people maybe said, how can they're bringing in too much materialism into this, into the community? And Rav Hillel said to them, if you realize where these people were coming from, that the entire apartment probably fits into the larder back in the States, the amount of luxury that they've come from, and they're giving that all up to come and live here in Eretz Yisrael. So on their level, that's precious. Could be. Again, everybody on his own level. So when a person, so as we said, just as thinking about this truth, the truth we said leads to the separation, so ignoring the facts we discussed stops him acquiring this precious. And also he brings out something here, courting the company of those who pursue honor and multiply vanity. Celebrity. People want to be famous, people want to be recognized, people want to be with the in crowd. Because when a person looks at, and of course there's all these television programs about the lifestyles of the rich and famous. For sure, when a person looks at all these things, he desires that. He thinks, wow, that's great. Look at I know whoever it is with this, these Arabs were. I was reading this thing that the Prince of Saudi Arabia, what's his name? What's MBD, MBS, BDS? He has his own plane. They have a lot of planes, but his wife has her own 707 just for her clothes. Wherever she flies, she has her own plane as a dressing. All her clothes are in the plane. So, like a person looks at that, oh, wow, it's difficult not to be dazzled, not to be impressed by that. And when you start to think like that, that draws you away, all that tinsel, all that sparkle. And even if this Yetzer Hara is not going to conquer him to start doing things which are illicit, immorality, eating things which are not kosher, whatever it is. But nevertheless, it's still going to put him into the battle. He's still going to have to fight. When a person focuses on the lifestyles of the rich and famous, he's a little nush inside him going, wow, that's so cool. So he's put himself already into that situation where he's having to fight it. And that's what it says. Shlomo HaMelech says in Koheles, Tov leleches el beis ovel. It's better to go to a house of mourning Meleches el beis mishta, than to go to a house of partying, than to go to some exclusive Hollywood premiere. Because a person, when he goes to a house of mourning, he's very much in touch with the reality of life. How short life is, how important life is, how one shouldn't waste a single second of one's life, how one shouldn't waste even the single seconds of life on something which is not going to do him any good, which is just going to vanish like a piece of food in his gullet, like a momentary pleasure. That's reality. A base oval is, that's it. A person now has left the world with whatever it is that he achieved. But when you go to a base mishta, party, celebrity, premiere, so it looks like, this is some kind of, it's very beguiling, and yet it's a complete illusion. As we said, and I'll just finish off, I want to get to the end of the paragraph, to the chapter, we'll get there quickly. The most important thing for this is hisbodedut, seclusion, self-reflection, spending time to go over these ideas. As David HaMelech said in Tehillim, Mi yitain li ever kayona. Who will give me the wings of a dove? I'll wander far off. Beautiful line. And I'll lie down in the desert. And I'll think. And I'll be with myself and the Kodesh Baruch Hu. And I'll reflect on the truly important things of life. And as Chazal, the Chomim, Chasidim, Rishonim, they followed after David HaMelech's footsteps, and they found the practice of seclusion an effective means of achieving precious. That's the bottom line here. And this protected them from being led into the vanities of the world of the media, and everything that we know about. And he says very clearly here, and I really mentioned this already, what you have to be careful for, and he gives a caution at the end of the chapter, is not to leap to the furthest reaches of precious, because you will certainly fall. When people come to Osamech, very often they're very enthusiastic, and sometimes you have to kind of just say, take it easy. Because there's an expression in Yiddish, chapping melochim, which means trying to grasping onto angels. You're so inspired and you're so fired up that you want to jump and you want to do everything in a split second, and that's a guaranteed recipe to find yourself flat on your face. Especially with precious, especially with those things which are beyond the letter of the law. You have to go very slowly, as we mentioned before. A little today, little by little, a little today, a little more tomorrow. And eventually it becomes second nature with the person. Okay, that ends his section on precious. We're now going to move on next week, Bezrat Hashem, to chapter 16, Perek Tes Zayin, which is the Midah of Tahara, literally means purity. All the best.